This is the second part of a series of videos explaining the history of the Wheel of Time. This video will make more sense if you've already watched part 1. The previous video covers the very beginning of time, starting with the moment of creation, and moves through the history of the First Age. Let's continue the journey through the ages. This video does contain minor historical and world-building spoilers, but will not include story or plot-related details for the main series of Wheel of Time books. Occasionally there will be a double question mark on the timeline. This means that the event in question contains spoilers that are revealed as important plot points in the books. I will skip over these in this video, but we'll address them in a future video dedicated to spoilers and plot-related details at the end of this Wheel of Timeline series. Today's narration comes courtesy of Rob from Malkier Talks, who graciously agreed to record my script for this episode. Please stay until the very end to learn more about Malkier Talks and the wonderful content he creates. Take it away, Rob.
In the previous video, we discussed the moment of creation and the history of the First Age. As was mentioned at the ending of that video, it seems that the discovery of the true source and subsequent learning to channel the One Power was the catalyst that ushered in the Second Age. In one interview, Robert Jordan said, "The first people to discover the ability to channel learned through trial and error, with fairly high casualty rates until they learned enough to not kill themselves accidentally." Their appearance marked the beginning of the previous age to that of the books, or at least the end of the age before that one. Yes, as I have set things up, there are ages where no one has any idea how to channel or even that the One Power exists, our own for one. According to the Wheel of Time companion, the Ring of Tamerlane supposedly was named after the first person to learn how to tap into the true source and channel the One Power, and in some tales was actually made by that man or woman. Despite what many Aes Sedai said, no one knew whether it was a man or a woman who first learned to channel. Some believed that the title of Amelin was actually a corruption of Tamerlane. We'll mark this event as the starting point of the Second Age. Similar to the First Age, very little is known about most of the history of the Second Age. What we do know is that the Second Age was a golden age of peace and progress, enlightenment, discovery, technological advancement, and idealism. Later, the Second Age became known as the Age of Legends. I will refer to the Second Age as the Age of Legends from now on. Much has been written by Robert Jordan about the Age of Legends and the utopian society of that time period. I cannot possibly include everything, but here are the Age of Legends highlights. People in the Age of Legends spoke what is now called the Old Tongue, which was a more advanced language than the Common Tongue that is spoken in the Third Age. Material wealth was not important. Progress was driven by status and honor, which was gained through service to the community and personal accomplishments. People were born with 2 names and could be given an honorific third name only through personal achievements. Men and women who could channel worked together to accomplish amazing feats of the One Power. These channelers were called Aes Sedai, which is translated from the Old Tongue to mean servants or servants of all. Channelers could live hundreds of years, and they used their healing abilities to keep non-channelers from dying of disease or most injuries. Non-channelers could live up to 150 or 200 years simply because of access to Aes Sedai healing. Living constructs were developed by Aes Sedai using the One Power. 2 types of these living constructs were Chora trees and Nim. The Chora trees were huge and green with trefoil leaves that emitted an aura of peace and well-being to any who passed beneath them. These trees lined the streets of most cities and gave those who passed through feelings of contentment. The Nim were sentient beings with the ability to utilize the One Power for the benefit of plants and growing things. This next bit is intentionally kept vague with some minor details removed to avoid spoilers. If a moment or bullet point is included with double question marks on the timeline, it will be revisited in more detail in the spoiler follow-up video later. Another group of humans called the Daishain were dedicated to a covenant of service to the Aes Sedai. The Daishain could often enhance channeling, as when adding their voices to the seed singing of the Ogier. Ogier were a separate race of large beings that aided the Nim and a group of humans called Daishain in plant and crop growth using a type of ability called seed singing. These races worked as a team, focusing the One Power to ensure perfect growth for every field they sang. Some crops were immune to blight and impervious to insects. Aes Sedai also used the One Power to manipulate the weather and to prevent drought, floods, and other natural disasters which were unknown in the Age of Legends. Aes Sedai also created and used many objects of the One Power called Angreal, Sa'angreal, and Ta'angreal. I spoke more in detail about these objects of power in my One Power video. A type of 3D projection technology existed for entertainment purposes, as well as telephone-like face-to-face holograms for communicating with people over long distances. According to Robert Jordan, everything used the One Power, even their cars and toasters. Various technologies were used for travelling. Channelers would use different types of One Power weaves to travel long distances in a short amount of time, but even non-channelers use different forms of transportation to travel, including vehicles such as show wings, which are like airplanes, Jokars and Jokar floaters, much like automobiles, jumpers, and hoverflies. Portal stones were even used to travel to other planets and worlds, as well as alternate realities. There were some incredible cities in the Age of Legends that had highly detailed architecture and some very impressive technological advancements. Swords were used for a type of sport, like fencing, but were not used violently. Violence in general was nearly unheard of. There was no war, or even understanding of war except vaguely by historians. Perhaps the biggest reason that this idealistic utopian society functioned was that people were not aware of the existence of the Dark One and were not influenced by his evil. When asked if the Age of Legends was actually the utopia that the characters in the books believed it to be, Robert Jordan responded saying, "Compared to their current world, it certainly would be a utopia. However, that doesn't mean that it was perfect. Of course, outbreaks of diseases were kept to a minimum, but it and other disasters of that ilk still occurred. Evil still existed as well." Let's now get into some of the important events and dates of the Age of Legends as we know them. About 400 years before the breaking, or 400 BB. During this time of peace and prosperity, about 400 years before the ending of the age, a man named Luz Therin was born. One day after Luz Therin's birth, a man named Barid Bel Madar was born. He later became the Forsaken called Demondred. Joar Adam Neosin, who later became the Forsaken Asmodean, was also born around this time. Nothing is known of his early life, but eventually Luz Therin became a very powerful Aes Sedai who gained his honorific third name through his accomplishments. He became known as Luz Therin Telamon. About 200 years before the end of the Age of Legends, Luz Therin Telamon was called the first among the servants, and he sat on the high seat. He wore the Ring of Tamlin and was able to summon the 9 Rods of Dominion. Robert Jordan explained in an interview that the 9 Rods of Dominion were regional governors of Earth, regional governors of the planet. So if I say summon them, then we've got a guy who has been given, in effect, ultimate power. So it seems that Luz Therin Telamon was basically the top of the food chain. He was likely the leader of the Aes Sedai, who were the most respected people of the age. Here are some other important things that happened during this time. Lilin Moiral, who later became the Forsaken Mogadeen, was born. There was a beautiful city called Vasine, which was home to the Collam Daan, a university that was the foremost centre for research and development. Floating high above the blue and silver domes of the Collam Daan was a large white, sphere-shaped scientific research facility called the Sharom. A woman named Sain Tarasind wanted to become a researcher at the Collam Daan, but was refused by the board, who, quote, labelled her unsuited for research, but agreed to allow her to instruct students. She later became the Forsaken called Masana. Another woman named Mirin Erenil, who was a researcher at the Collam Daan, was in a brief relationship with Luz Therin Telamon during this time. Luz Therin eventually broke off the relationship because of Mirin's ambition, claiming that she was more interested in her association with him and his power than she was in him. Later, Mirin and a team of Aes Sedai researchers at the Collam Daan, including someone we know very little about called Bidamon, discovered a thin place in the pattern that appeared to cover an undivided source of the One Power separate from the true source. The researchers thought that this newly discovered power could be used by both men and women equally, and if they could tap into that power, they would no longer be restricted by 2 separate halves of power. I'm going to quote this next section directly from the world of Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time because it says it better than I ever could. It was apparently inaccessible by the means used for the One Power, but they had only to bore a small hole in the pattern to tap it. using the one power in what was, they hoped, the last time shai'tan and shai'tan would be used separated. Merrin and the team bored through the source of the unusual power emanations. The resulting backlash destroyed the Floating Sharom, shattering it like the egg it so resembled, and creating ripples in the fabric of reality as shockwaves from the breach shook the pattern. It was not an indivisible source of the one power that the team had discovered, but the place outside of the pattern where the Dark One had been imprisoned since the moment of creation. The emanations Merrin and the others had sensed with such hope were his dark energies, trapped just beyond the thin place in the pattern that covered his prison. The hole they created has been ever after known as the Bore. One of the Aes Sedai researchers named Jorleen Corbison, as well as many others whose names are unknown, were killed when the bore was drilled. But surprisingly, Merrin and Biedemon did not die from the explosion of the Sharom. It wasn't until later, during the War of the Shadow, that Merrin joined the Shadow and became known as the Forsaken Lanfear, which we'll discuss further in the next video. However, Robert Jordan said this about Biedemon and Merrin, or Lanfear. Biedemon was a male Aes Sedai and a research genius who believed that they were onto something great. The drilling of the bore itself caused great damage, and Biedemon, Lanfear and others involved were blamed for that. Once it became clear what had actually happened, the opprobrium increased, and Biedemon sought obscurity, finally committing suicide when he was unable to achieve it. Everyone knew his name and what he had done. He had nowhere to hide. As an aside, for those who think that Lanfear was in some way twisted against her will by being involved in drilling the bore, I have heard the theory advanced. Of all those involved in the project, she was the only major figure to go over to the Shadow. She was ripe for the Shadow's plucking long before the bore was drilled. And so, perhaps because of hubris, or maybe just dumb bad luck, the Dark One's prison was discovered, and he was able to begin influencing the world. The utopian society of the Age of Legends would soon shatter, just as the Sharom did, and the world would never be the same. In the next video, we'll learn of the Dark One's influence and the corruption that swept over the world, the collapse of the utopian Age of Legends, and the War of the Shadow that followed.
Special thanks to Rob from Malkier Talks for helping me record the voiceover narration for this segment of Wheel of Timelines. You should definitely check out Rob's YouTube channel and his podcast. Both are called Malkier Talks. You should also follow him on Twitter. I'll provide links in the description. But who better to talk about his content than Rob himself?
Hi everyone, I'm Rob from Malkier Talks. I am a Wheel of Time food tuber making dishes mentioned throughout the books, all in my home kitchen just for fun. When I'm not making food in my kitchen, you can find me recording podcasts. I do a Wheel of Time Theory podcast, loads of different guests, including Lauren, and we talked about Nakomi, which was so much fun. As well as that, on my channels, I throw in unboxing videos for merchandise, and I do narrations of bits that I just love from the books. It's just so much fun, because basically I'm obsessed with the Wheel of Time, so much so, I've even gotten sous chef Narg to join me in a few videos. So if you haven't heard me, haven't listened to me, haven't watched me, please search for me everywhere as Malkier Talks, and come and join me on this crazy and wacky journey. Bye guys.
Please support me on Patreon so I can make more of these videos. Thank you to my patrons. Thank you to my researchers and editors who helped with the script, and thank you to the artists who gave me permission to use your artwork. Please check links in the description to learn more about them and their great work. Until next time, the light illumine you.